get a bit bored with us, you can listen to it later. Now, today is going to be a bit of a different session. As you'll see, we're wanting to deal with the issue of risk and managing risk. And the way we're going to do it is that, first of all, I'm going to catch you up with the latest from our Risk Assessors Network. Now, I suspect that most of you probably don't know what that is, so I'm going to tell you about it. And then we're going to be inspired to thinking about risk outside the square with Ric McConaghy, who will be very well known to many of you. I'm going to introduce Ric now because then when I finish, I can easily just pass over to Ric. I describe Ric as an artist because he isn't a landscape architect, as are many of our playground designers, most of them really, as well as our supplier members. And so you'll always see in his work the differences that he brings to the design of play spaces around the country. He has been designing spaces for 30 years, probably plus, and in my view, he's provided much of the inspiration to the practice of place-based design, particularly when thinking about use of the natural environment and the inclusion of kids in play. It's very in these days to talk about nature play and the natural environment and children with disabilities and all those things that we've all been working on. But I suspect that long before I knew Ric, he was thinking and designing spaces in accord with those very important principles of design. So we're really pleased that Ric is going to talk with us today. And I've said to him that I want him to challenge us as playground standards play an important role in the work that we all do, but of much greater significance is our own development, I suppose, and our own thoughts in thinking about risk. So I don't know what he's going to tell us, and he possibly doesn't either, but we'll see where we go. But first of all, I need to tell you about the Risk Assessors Network, and this is a really important initiative for Play Australia. And again, most of you deal with risk management on a daily basis, and you would know, as we all do, that there have been many, many issues around which playground standards do not provide a great deal of satisfaction. And so there's always lack of clarity. There is always gaps, and there's always contradictions in playground standards. And so what the Board of Play Australia has decided to do is to establish what we're calling the Risk Assessors Network, which comprises risk assessors within our industry who are Play Australia members and who work independently of government and industry. And there are about, I think last count, about 20 odd people. I don't mean odd as in odd, I mean 20 people from around the country who actually work as independent risk assessors. So what's its purpose? The purpose of the Risk Assessors Network is to provide a forum for playground auditors and risk assessors to discuss issues relating to the interpretation of standards and deviations which may be viewed as acceptable based on risk assessment principles, which will benefit their work and will provide much needed advice to our members who manage playgrounds across the country. While the playground standards are an important tool in the design and assessment of playgrounds, and compliance should generally be the aim of playground design, compliance should generally be the aim, there are instances where compliance may not be practical or the best outcome for children's play. And thus we've been talking for some years now about the term risk benefit, or some people say benefit risk, but it doesn't really matter which way you put the words. What we're saying is that managing risk needs to be a two-edged sword, and that the play needs of children need to be front and centre of our work, and the risk side of it needs to be around ensuring that the play needs dominate. So it needs to be recognised that playground standards are not perfect in their content. They never have been, and they certainly never will be. And this was one of the lessons that I had to learn when I started in this position, because I used to think and say to people, why can't you just give me an answer for that question? And then I can tell it to our members. And I had to learn that, of course, design means that you can rarely do that, and you would actually never want to do it. Otherwise, all we would be doing is building playgrounds that we lift out of a box and put in the ground. We don't want to do that. And so every time there's a new design idea, there are risks associated with it. And so it's a process that we all engage with, rather than simply providing black and white solutions, of which there are very few. So we know that we need to modify and improve standards, and the Standards Committee in Australia does do that. And in fact, most people think that the standards that we have today are pretty okay, but there will always be areas that need discussion and consideration. There are ambiguities in places and certain clauses that will always be open to some degree of interpretation. So what we decided to do is to set up this Risk Assessors Network. There have been 2 meetings online, and how it works is that people meet and discuss issues that have been prepared and circulated. And basically, when I say prepared, people volunteer to do some writing about particular issues that they're concerned about. They are then circulated, discussed, and so on. And what we plan on doing is, particularly when we can get a consensus of opinion, and you could imagine there is a difference of opinion across our 20 plus risk assessors, we will then put that information on our website under our risk management hub, which we hope to be able to develop into a really valuable resource for you, our members. But it also is very much for risk assessors to benefit from as well. You would be aware that most people who work in risk assessment work in a very isolated capacity. And if there's one thing I've learned over the years, is that issues that are complex to do with playground design and development and management, and collaboration is an absolutely essential part of this business. And so the Risk Assessors Network is connecting people, and their ideas will obviously be of benefit to everybody else. Okay.
Hey, Barb, can I just interject just quickly?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure we've got 50 attendees here, and they're probably thinking, well, how can I get involved with the network, or how can I table issues for discussion?
It's a good question, because they're not invited to do that.
Yeah.
It's a network for risk assessors.
Yes.
It's not a network for people who make play equipment, people who manage playgrounds. Now, that's not to say that there can't be issues that you feel that you need information and support on, and I will always welcome that inclusion, and I will forward it to the people on the Risk Assessors Network. But it's predominantly for the risk assessors, and believe me, the risk assessors actually do know what the issues are, because they're dealing with them every day. So how are we organising this? The board has invited Andrew Reedy of Playcheck in WA, Justin Casey of Playforce in Queensland, and Rob Hamilton of Parks and Play Space in Victoria to form a steering committee with me to lead the network. Andrew is also the chair of the Standards Committee, the Playground Standards Committee, and so the connection with both groups makes some pretty good sense. The network will operate quite separately from the Standards Committee. I mean, it's a Play Australia process, and will be child focused, meaning that it will focus on the protection of kids' rights to play and support risk benefit. And so we're not interested in simply making interpretation of standards, black and white issues. We're interested in talking about how we can enhance kids' play opportunities. And what has happened to date and will continue to happen is that members of the network submit issues to the meeting for consideration, and the group collectively decides on what the issues are, and I'll tell you about a couple of that have been dealt with to date. And once agreement has been reached on these issues, the material will be put on our risk management hub. So what have we done in the 2 meetings we've had to date? The group decided that these 2 issues needed further discussion, one being opening in barriers, and the second one, the impact area of slides. Now, on one of those issues, we've agreed on a set of words that will be put on the website. On another of those issues, I think work is still continuing. And the next issue that is going to be looked at concerns rocks around embankment slides. And this is becoming very much a popular issue. And so people will have lots of opinions about that. And it's interesting that I was in Sydney not so long ago when there was a heated discussion about the issue of tunnel slides and injury from the tunnel slides in one of the councils in New South Wales. And it's become apparent that developers are building towers with tunnel slides all over the country, and there are quite significant injuries that are happening as a result of the speed, it seems, that you can travel down one of these slides. So I know that the Standards Committee is going to be looking at that, and I would imagine that Andrew's advice would be, let's have a talk about it, but let's wait and see what the Standards Committee actually deals with, how they deal with it, because it does need to be dealt with. So I think that's probably all I need to say. We'll continue to provide our full benefits members, that's by and large councils and industry, on these issues as they're developed. And when there is information on the website, you will be the first to know. So I think that is enough from me, but I probably need to ask, everybody's still on mute, aren't they, Kieran? Yeah, okay.
They are on mute.
We can come back to this later if we wish, but I'm keen to move on to Rick and to get talking about the interesting stuff. So welcome, Rick, and over to you.
Thank you, Barb, and thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to do my best today. This is very unusual, having been, as we all have, locked away for a few years and not as used to social interaction as I have been previously, and certainly not having presented for a while. Today presents me with a risky challenge in terms of getting my head around how I might present. So I don't have a lot of pictures today. I've got lots of cool things. I can put the battery in the Astro Boy at the back and have him whiz around if you like, or something. So it's going to be just me talking. If it starts to drag, Kieran has kindly offered that he'll just take lots and lots of questions. We'll turn it into a question and answer session. So there are multiplicity of opportunities for how this might go today, and that kind of helps to define the playful nature of how I try to approach things. It's a risky approach, but play is inherently risky. If you put play into a process, you get play out, as many people who have had to sit through design meetings with me and project control groups will attest. Play is a broad, diverse, sometimes over-romanticised. It's thought to be, we try to make it inclusive. It can be incredibly exclusive. I've forgotten how many hours standing against a wall waiting to be picked for a team. So it can be incredibly exclusive. And it's not often or necessarily done with malice, but it's done with a desire to win the game or get the best on each side and everything like that. But it's incredibly broad and incredibly diverse, and it happens all the time and everywhere, and it is risky. And that is one of the most fundamental aspects of it. Our homes are risky, more accidents happen in our homes, but then we spend more time in our homes. So you know, you've always got to be conscious of the notion that what are the parameters of the numbers that you come up with when we're trying to have an exchange with things. Are we talking about something? Are we just saying that number and that number? Are we trying to talk about, are we trying to have a genuinely open-hearted, open-minded exchange of ideas where we might come to some kind of truth? Or are we simply trying to score, push an agenda, and so on? There's obviously a lot of things going on in the world at the moment. There's a degree of enthusiasm by some people within the world of Australia at the moment by the proposition that there might be a new approach to collaborative, community-based exchange in terms of getting things to happen. It's something I've always desired to do. I would far rather be doing this presentation in front of you all. I find Zoom spectacularly difficult. I'm sitting in my little room here with all my safe objects. I'm getting no feedback whatsoever, not the slightest guffaw at my appalling dad jokes, not even the occasional nodding head. It's very weird. It's not my natural habitat. So I do apologize if today is a bit weird. I'll do my best to try and adapt to this new environment and bring some sort of inspiration to it. It's always wonderful when you're going to present. I came in this morning. How am I going to do this? Why have I said yes? What was I thinking? So I got in here extraordinarily early this morning before the birdies got up, but whilst the trees were still going horizontal in the incredible winds we've been having. And I thought I need to get my brain around what's going to happen today. And I don't have slides. I don't do slides. Yeah. But I delved into this. Now, I know you all know this document, but I wonder if it sits in a shelf up next to A Brief History of Time, which is significantly more impenetrable than this, but we all had a crack at. The wonderful thing about this document, which is just amazing, and I just refamiliarized myself with it this morning because it is succinct, thoughtful, inclusive, and probably covers everything that needs to be covered in the first 20 pages of everything that I was going to talk about for the next half an hour. And then after that, the rest of the document is basically wonderful case studies that go, I told you so, I told you so. But if you read the first 20 pages of this, you could sign off now, watch the numbers plummet, and get everything that I've been trying to say, because it really is a great testament to that truth-seeking proposition that we have different opinions, we have different perceptions. One client will be going this way, one client will be going that way, one reference group of community will have this aspiration, another will have another. Some people will seek to have every play space, have everything, providing everything, but how a $50,000 local playground next to a footy oval 150 kilometres southwest of a major urban centre can provide the same thing as a $5 million gig in the heart of the city is beyond me, certainly. But if we can create a balance of expectation but take everyone along with us, then every space can create opportunities for everyone, regardless of the budgets and the resources available. But the point is that by making these provisions, we're trying to create spaces for players, sometimes children, sometimes adults, sometimes youth, to have experiences where they can aspire to doing things differently. A lot of our cultural and urban centres, be it in a small rural town, a regional centre, or a heavily populated urban centre, a lot of these play spaces that we're providing are creating almost a respite from the centres that we've created. The centres that we've created have been designed around commerce and cars and so on, and they are almost, well, they're as risky a space as anything we're talking about, to be quite honest. And so there's a whole lot of control parameters placed on it, be it pedestrian lights or whatever, to manage people moving through those spaces. But they have become, to an extent, a little bit hostile. And there's lots of research and exploration of how we can quietly try to make our urban, regional and rural centres somewhat more accommodating to humans. In the meantime, for children who are fundamentally spontaneous, informal, and chaotic, find moving through these centres incredibly difficult. And so we come along and we go plonksky and pop up a space there for children to express their enthusiasm, engagement, and wonder with all things in life, and try to explore their physical, emotional, and social needs in this tiny little capsule of kid spaceness, and then have to come out and re-engage with the world. So within that space, we provide opportunities for imagination, exploration, extension, graded challenges and things. And we're forever trying to create opportunities where a child might engage with something. And if they come to get a level of mastery, which is not the ideal word, but it's the only one popping in my head at the moment, they might then engage with the next iteration of that forces them to take more risk or forces them to engage in a slightly more adventurous decision-making process. These are not spaces where carers and adults and people should be going with children and then disconnecting or connecting to a device and leaving them to engage. They are demonstrably spaces that we're all working feverishly to create challenge within. And it's not an ideal situation then to go in and disengage with the children that you have care for any more than you would disengage with a child if you took them to the beach. Now, it feels like a different environment, but I would argue that a beach environment is much more like a play space than, say, the playing surface of the MCG. It would be ideal if we had playing surfaces of the MCG everywhere. Parents could all sit in the centre looking at their devices and the kids could run around on the grass because there'd be no opportunity for injury or anything, unless they happen to run in and bump into each other or start picking up sticks or whatever. Anyway, these are spaces where it's ideal that risk is provided, but it's also ideal that we find ways to facilitate the engagement of adults into the space so that they might then take on that notion of exploring parameters and aspirations and adventures with the children that they have their care of. This happens a lot in early childhood, which was one of the greatest forums for children to genuinely explore play, slightly to a lesser extent in primary and as children move up through the educational process. Not a criticism, a simple observation, happy for it to be challenged. But it seems that engagement between adults, carers and children starts to separate a little bit. And sometimes that's at the initiation of the children. So anyway, we've got these spaces and within that, we're trying to create risk. It seems a kind of this is one of the moments this morning where I wanted to say something that I didn't want to, I normally just let myself go and as you're seeing, but there was a moment there where I wanted to try and talk about the balance that this talks about. And I wrote something down and I thought it was an interesting idea and I want to share it with you. And I just want to find it in some of the crazy notes that I was writing this morning. Risk means different things to different people. The Australian standards have been wonderfully driven for years. We really are blessed. It's an interesting conundrum that they remain what I would use the phrase guidelines. They are not as rigid, they are not as legislated as 1428, the standards for disability. That doesn't mean that they won't be reached for immediately in any kind of challenge, of which there are a lot less challenges than the public perception exist. And I've found through experience that a vast majority of issues where incidents have happened in play spaces, if the clients who are making the play provision meaningfully, genuinely, and in a humanitarian way engage with the people that are raising issues with them, then many, many, many of those issues can be resolved through an exchange of communication. And that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it goes on to courts and things, but the vast majority of the time, if people deal with people, some of these issues can be resolved. Many of these issues can be resolved. And perhaps, as well as looking at risk management and those sorts of things, we need to be exploring how we can impress upon parents and carers that when they enter a play space, they are intentionally entering an environment where their children and the people that are in their care are going to be challenged. It is not ideal for you to come in here and say, I'm bringing my kids here so I can chillax and so on. It's always been, this is a bad analogy. I'm sorry, Kieran, you're going to get bombarded now. It's always been, it makes me tingle when I think of the times when a surfer might get attacked by a shark. And there will be this incredible community reaction that we need to go out there and shoot all the sharks. And the very people that come to the defense of those creatures are the people that are directly impacted by the attack. And if it's been a particularly nasty incident, sorry, it'll be the family saying, no, that's the environment that we chose to go and exist in. We accept the responsibility of going into this space where we are seeking recreation, exhilaration, spirituality, social connection, obviously romanticizing it a little bit, but you get what I'm saying. And we accept that there are inherent risks in our activity that we have engaged with. It's fundamental to the continuing provision of engaging spaces that we somehow engage with the parents and carers of children that we are making these provisions for, and say you are accepting a degree of responsibility by entering these spaces, that they are not places for you to take time out. They are places where we are challenging your children and we are wanting them to engage with natural materials, artificial materials, other children, other cultures, opportunities for waiting, opportunities for engagement, opportunities for bigger and littler, managing your space around each other. They're incredibly complex. If you think about the design of a play space and the complexity of all the components that are the tangents of each softball area brushing against each other. We're trying to squeeze some nature in there. We need to accommodate seating. We need to accommodate potentially shade, but hopefully in a natural way that will continue to enhance rather than just in an artificial way, which will spectacularly remain 10 metres to the left of everywhere that it needs to be. They are incredibly complex, intense, and sometimes, quite frankly, overwhelming spaces, but they are incredibly social and rich and brilliant spaces for children to exist in. Not everyone's going to provide all that it can, but through a council conglomerate, they can provide a range of opportunities throughout a range of different spaces where people seeking different kinds of play engagement can go. Some may want to always go to the fully fenced, fully furnitured, fully shaded, fully rubbered environment where you can go in white and come out still white in terms of clothing. Others might wish to go somewhere where it's open-ended, open-bounded, come out grubby and with the occasional scratch and bruise and so on. And you're never going to create the ideal space that accommodates everyone. But if we can once again educate people about and that works spectacularally brilliantly in Victoria. There's a range of different play things. I don't do social media, but I'm there's in the different mediums you can go in and people will give their opinions. Now obviously with social media sometimes it can be it's risky. It can be a little bit of prone to some fairly obnoxious behavior. But sorry, my asthma is a bit ordinary today with all the wind in them. I apologise. Sorry. Probably shouldn't have said the word. Anyway, so we have all these spaces and within them we're trying to create risk and balance. I did digress. I want to find that thing. I'm going to go here. I'm sorry, but it may be awful, but it seemed to make so much sense to me at the time. Sorry, I've just dropped something on my keyboard. This is kind of the point I wanted to make, I guess, in a nutshell. If we're accepting that play is inherently risky, and there's an enormous amount of, increasing amount of empirical evidence to prove, even though we anecdotally understood it, but sometimes proof is necessary, that the benefits mentally, physically, socially, inclusively, the benefits of play are profound. They just are. And it has been, there's the child environment and community, child, youth and environments. They've got a couple of COVID specials. I can't even begin to imagine, if we're talking about risk, what the COVID situation has done to this generation of children, particularly in the last few years, in terms of their capacity for socialization, understanding. They seem to, I engage with children and youth a lot, they seem to have a great acceptance for other people's diversity whilst having an extraordinary sense of their own failings. I can't even put this into words. Anyway, play is inherently risky, necessary. It provides great opportunities for improving your physical, mental, social, spiritual well-being. So if we accept that play is amazing, and if we accept the recognition of the value of play as being inclusion, and if we accept that play is fundamentally risky, physically, emotionally, and socially, then whilst managing risk is a critical duty, it is completely counterintuitive to want to eliminate risk. In seeking to eliminate risk, when we recognize play as risky and incredibly good for us, and it has demonstrable benefits. And if we overemphasize the elimination of the opportunity for agency and risk-taking, you will also have to be fundamentally diminishing and minimizing the benefits that that activity will create and will provide. So I came through last century, literally, there were great people trying to put play safety onto the map. Ron Summers, Peter Thompson, there's the list of them. And at the time it was incredibly challenging because we had less evidence-based things saying, well, play is really amazing. And a whole lot of other people saying, yeah, but look at that monkey bars over there on the concrete so that no one has to mow around the grass. You know, that's a problem. So what happened, there was in the 80s particularly, there's this massive pendulum swing where play, the whole conversation about play pretty much immediately digressed off into a conversation about safety. As pendulums do, it swung back, and over the decades, I bumped into Ron and Peter and other people as well. And it came to a large acceptance that we need to, I think, as the wise old bird of the Standards Committee often says, and he'll know who I mean, not that he'll hear this, let's make it as safe as is necessary, not as safe as it is possible. If we make it as safe as is possible, we are buying into that thing that says we know play is great, we know risk is beneficial, but we're going to try and nerf, for those of you out there that are gamers, we're going to try and nerf the very benefit that play creates by making it so underwhelmingly less risky that the benefit is almost diminished to the point of why would you put your resources toward that in the first place? What is the point of allocating a significant amount of resources to facilitate, design, install, and look after? And there's a whole, by the way, Karen, Barb, there's a whole discussion around operational. We've got a thing happening up here at the moment where there's so much money being put towards play spaces, which is great, but they land like UFOs in the landscape, and then these councils and communities are placed in this invidious position of then having to figure out how to create the resources for the ongoing operational management of these spaces. Now that can come back to the design, and there's a risk there too in over designing stuff that then almost becomes a fun park that requires staffing. So I guess the point of today really was to say the main points of what I was trying to explore is that I think we genuinely need to try and take the community with us in what we're trying to achieve by making play provision. I think it's really critical to somehow find a mechanism that isn't a sign saying zing, 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 zing at the start, but by entering this space, be it fenced, be it not, there's a whole nother conversation, that you are engaging, you are intentionally engaging in the facilities that are being provided in here, and you accept some responsibility toward the benefit. The risk benefit model has been one of the most fundamental changes in play provision in my lifetime career, whatever. So much of play was about talking about safety and risk through the first 2 decades of my experience. And for someone to come along and say, let's do a SWOT analysis, let's say, well, yeah, there are some things here, but there are massive benefits in play. I think the thing that I love most about what's happening today is immediately after I stop ranting, you're then going to be reintroduced to the whole notion of the 1,000 streets. Sorry, I'm so hopeless at memory. The idea that play can take place outside the front of your house, in the yard, in the alleyway, down there, up a tree, and so on. The risk we're taking is by charging so much money and resources towards making these little islands of engagement and wonder and creativity and spirituality and emotional and physical challenge, that becomes the norm, when in actual fact, they should be the seeds that filter out to tell us how to engage with, how to design, how to create human spaces in urban, regional and rural centres that are built for humans to exist in, rather than, to my mind, being defined by the commercial activities and the presence of the car. Maybe this is going to happen anyway as the whole climate, fuel, whatever, and maybe we're just going to be forced into a position where we have to reinvent that. And that's going to be a pretty big challenge for Australia, because I still, to this day, prefer jumping in my car when I'm doing regional play spaces all over the country, or on the bike if I'm feeling brave, and going to these places along the ground. That's a risk-benefit analysis between getting stuck in a tube and 1,000 million feet above the ground, or seeing the country unfold and coming into communities as I arrive with a sense of what I'm coming through and where I am and what I'm feeling with the land, and whether I get the opportunity then to engage with the broader community and with Indigenous and cultural groups and things like that. I think play has the capacity, this sounds a bit Age of Aquarius, but it has the capacity to inform how the greater urban environment can be experienced by humans, because it is fundamentally being created for and by humans for that activity of engagement, inclusion. It's not always successful, but it's significantly more successful than multi-story buildings with lights on all night, multi-lane highways, and so on and so forth. So I understand that this has been a little bit off course, potentially, but I think the risks like play are broader than, can you, oh, sorry, that's, sorry. Could you all please mute your phones? On that note, that sounds like the final siren of the grand final. Go to Swannies. Adam Goods, sorry. He watches over all my efforts. Thank you for your time. I hope this hasn't been an insane rave. It probably has. Play is an extraordinary thing that we're all involved in, and I think you all need to appreciate what an incredibly rich, diverse, and privileged opportunity we have to engage with the future generations and give them places that they are so going to need at the moment. That they are so going to need to find spaces back in this insane world where they can start to connect with each other, start to find each other, start to understand that whilst everyone else is amazing, they too are enough, and can start to find a way back into re-engaging with communities and spaces, and not be terrified of walking out their doors and breathing the air, because that's too risky. Thank you for your time. Sorry if it was a rave. I appreciate the opportunity. Take care. Lots of love.
Kieran, can we unmute everybody, because we've got 54 people online now, and I'd like people to be able to talk themselves. Is that possible?
Yes, that's just been done.
Okay, back to you, Kieran.
They'll just need to unmute themselves to speak.
Okay.
Right. So for our listeners who have tuned in today, you can either type a question in the chat, or you can actually put up your hand using the reactions. Just put your hand up, and we can introduce you into the conversation. It was a fantastic discussion, Rick. One of the ones I was thinking about when you were talking, and I really do see you as a big advocate for the child and for embracing risk benefit. When you're sitting around and you're having your design discussions with a bunch of different people who hold different views, is there data that you lean on to really push that notion that well, actually embracing challenge is a really good thing for children? Have you got your go-to data sets? And my other question about that is there gaps? So when I think about Play Australia's role, we really need to shine a light on that key information that helps our designers to push for risk benefit. How do you go with presenting that evidence, Rick?
Well, look, in a community-based environment, I'm probably not going to start whipping out the scientific pages, but they exist. There's so many players throughout the world. The Play Australia and also IPA a fundamentally extraordinary opportunity to engage, and everyone is so generous that if you want to find that sort of stuff out, there's definitely increasing amounts of empirical data to back up what's been understood forever, just by watching children, that the child that plays and does things has a greater capacity for development, if that's a word that matters, than the child who is completely reserved and doesn't. And I'm not saying one is better child than the other or anything. I'm just saying, in terms of answering your question, there's definitely data, there's definitely scientific papers, there's definitely, there's people everywhere doing studies of these, whether it's through early childhood or through other mechanisms, and there's people starting to write more and more books about them as well. So there is a vast, in a community situation, I'm not going to drop empirical data on the table. Always happy to provide links if people want to explore it, but the nature of that, I guess they take on board that they want to make this space and they want to create it, and if they've already got to that point, they've recognised that the need for children to engage is there. So, but definitely there's a lot. IPA would almost certainly have reading lists and things. It's always a problem. That's why I waved this around. Look at this. This is the other page. Sorry. Look at that. Look at the top. Okay, you got a problem. Okay, got it up. Pull it out. Look at this.
It's a terrific guide. Getting the balance right.
That's a problem. Talk to people. We've got a thing. Talk to people.
Absolutely. So
that's amazing.
That getting the balance right guide is available on our risk management hub. So I Encourage
should have
everyone.
just read that. You would have saved yourself some time.
Hey, Rick, there was another really interesting point that you were talking about how you engage adults. And I do think about adults today and how much we do stare at the mobile phones when we go to play spaces, and you generally see them sitting on the park bench.
Not all of them.
Not all of them,
yeah.
no.
No, but it's got to be said. It's a bit of a stereotype. It's not.
But but it is interesting thinking about how you engage adults into spaces, and I suppose it poses a new challenge for designers in terms of, all right, when you're having that discussion around the design table, how do you create those prompts so adults do?
Well, it's really critical
and engage.
The bigger problem I see, and I'm sorry, I apologise to everyone for this, but it's just how I feel. And I'm not. I worry at the moment that children's spaces are finally getting the recognition that they can provide incredible things. But the thing that concerns me is that they are now getting resourced, but now, again, a lot of those resources are being funneled off to what I would consider adult needs. So you suddenly get $10 and you're going, yay, I've never had $10 to do a play space before. And suddenly you're spending $2 on the fencing and the $1.50 on the furniture and the thing for this and the thing for that. And suddenly you've got a sliding pole and a whoopee cushion, to play on. And it's like, if you want to fund adult stuff, as if there isn't enough adult stuff out there, find another line, we're all fighting to get play opportunities. And then these things are coming along with these checklists and going, yeah, but did you do that? And did you do that? And do that and that and that? And they're not always representative of what every adult wants in that space. There's probably a place for some of it. There's certainly an opportunity if a space is larger to create provision for people to be able to stay longer and all that. I'm not being silly about it, but it can be, it can be tricksy when you're trying to create as many diverse opportunities. The whole point of inclusion is it took that wonderful conversation that had to happen, which did not exist when I started, of access, and the whole access thing was literally measured against 1428. If you could get the people in there, great. Whether they had an opportunity to engage with experiences or other people or anything was completely beside the point because it conformed to the standard. Now, we have much more diverse and better auditors now who are saying, look, can we achieve even getting to the space? Can we engage when we're in there? So that's another great shift that's been incredible. But I think one of the things we're banging up against is adults or carers, some not recognizing that these spaces are completely designed and intended to be physically, emotionally, spiritually, socially challenging. I think the whole point is to go in there and give kids an opportunity to make informed decisions about their agency, about what they're going to do and how they might try it and what they're going to take on. And parents and carers need to understand that. And they also then need to make the choices to say, okay, I took my kid there. That was out of control. Take them somewhere else. It's not a diss. You can't possibly expect every space is going to do everything. Try a different one. Go on to the social things. Oh, this one's blah, blah, blah. Find one that's better suited to the kind of engagement you want to do and the kind of opportunities that the kid is looking for. Don't try and make every space uniformly, conformingly to your perception of what they should be doing.
Terrific advice, Rick. Oh, we've got Peter Samples just posted a question in the chat. Peter Sample from Marion, City Council for the time being in SA before he jets off across to Ireland.
Can I come?
Pete, do you want to take yourself off mute and you can actually ask your question just to bring a different voice into the room?
I can't hear anything.
No, we'll give him 10 more seconds.
He hasn't got a mic.
Oh, he hasn't got a mic. He says, great to hear from you, Rick. Would love for risk assessors to undertake a single source of truth qualification. What's acceptable to one is often deemed too dangerous to others, often undermining the benefits of risky play. In time, the standards will define risky play parameters, but this will take time. Yeah, absolutely agree.
Yeah, look, the reality of that is that it's the same thing again. We always have choice. This is going to, I'm sorry, but I'm just going to run with this. Certain clients want to provide certain things, certain other clients want to provide other things. It is critical through the process that you engage the people for the outcome that you want. I think most people would accept that some auditors are incredibly rigid in their interpretation of the standards and others are looking for a different perspective. I'm not trying to say one's better than the other. I'm just saying there are different perspectives. We've acknowledged this. Different people take on different perspectives and are willing to put their names against certain things. And that's fine and that's allowable. So the client should then be looking for the designer, the auditor that affirms the type of thing that they want to provide. Now, if they are and I use the word conservative in not the last 2 weeks of team thing, then fine, take a conservative approach and do that. If they want to explore and be explorative and a little bit different interpretation, go that way. That's a choice. You have that choice and you will, if you ask 10 people to design a space, you'll get 10 different designs. It's not a surprise that if you ask 10 different auditors to audit a space, you'll get 10 different audits. That shouldn't be a surprise. So I think in regards to Peter's question, a client would be looking for a certain outcome for the space. They should be mindful of that in terms of who they then engage to give them the advice on whether it's going to conform. The standards are interpretable. They're not brown wire here, green wire there, for obvious reasons. I wouldn't want the electricity standard to be as interpretable as the playground standard. They're different things.
Rick, it's an important point you make because I think sometimes people think that a risk assessor has got some degree of qualification. There is no qualification for a risk assessor. A risk assessor is a self-appointed person who decides to set up a business to be a risk assessor. And clearly, a few are engineers and a few have all kinds of participation in various training programs and what have you. And I don't say this in any disrespect to any of our risk assessors. Overall, I think they do a terrific job.
Absolutely.
But there is no requirement around, no standard that says you must have this university qualification to be a risk assessor. And I think people do exactly what you're suggesting. And there are people who provide varying kinds of risk assessors. Some particularly known well to me, like Paul Grover, he tends to deal predominantly with design people, whereas there are others who do very much more risk assessments on the ground and so forth. So it's a very important point you make. Kieran, back to you.
Yeah, we're sort of we've got about 5 minutes to go, Barb. So Rick, look, we might start to do the wrap up there. It doesn't seem to be any questions in the chat. If you have sort of one take home for all our attendees today, what's your key message, Rick?
It wouldn't be the biggest risk we face at the moment is the lost generation of what just fucking took place for the last 3 years. It's not about play. It's not a.
But I guess play.
Keep an eye on your children.
Yes, we had a
engage with them when they don't want to be engaged with.
We had a terrific session a few weeks back from some play therapists in New South Wales, and it's interesting to observe that play is becoming better understood as an important process for people who are dealing with stress and difficulty. I was noting this morning that we have an increasing number of occupational therapists who are members of Play Australia, and that's because they know the importance of play for children outside. Rick, I wanted to comment too on the question about adult play, and we're going to have a session about this later on because I know that our friends in the ACT are very interested in this issue, and that will probably have come about from adults in the ACT who want to have equipment for themselves and so forth. But I remember the day that Wombat Bend in Templestowe was open. We're talking, I suppose, about goodness, 11, 12 years ago, and you were down for the grand final, and I took you out there first thing in the morning, and what amazed me was this terrific climbing frame that adults were using as well as kids. And also was one of Don Walk's wonderful, it was one of the early, very good, what do you call them, flying foxes in Wombat Bend. And again, adults were using those. And so one of the key issues has to be that if you seriously think about design and equipment, it is as good for adults as it can be for children.
A simple act of putting 4 different seats on a quadruple swing. You have an accessibility harness, a baby seat, a toddler seat, and a rigid seat. Now, rigid seats for adults are way better to be able to generate force, in my opinion. Still can be impact attenuating. But that simple act can have parents swinging there, you know. And they may not do it when everyone else is there because it's still a bit weird. You know, it's funny how adults will engage with building sandcastles at the beach, but maybe not in a playground. It's funny, you know. Sometimes there's a different kind of perception of what happens in different spaces. But anyway, sorry, raving again.
Some people who are here with us today will remember Alan Bull, who worked for some years with PLA. He told me once that he used to take his dog to the local playground because the dog absolutely loved the swing, but he used to do it when there was nobody else in the playground. Yeah. Rick, thank you enormously. We really appreciate your preparedness to talk with us today as you have, and I personally know that there is no one better than you in dealing with that whole community engagement. And I happen to know that you're doing some really significant work at the minute down in East Gippsland with Indigenous communities and people with disabilities you've worked with so successfully for decades. And it's you see it as an incredibly important part of the development process. You don't just do it because you have to do it. So, you know, all strength to your arm, and thank you enormously. But before we go, let me tell you about next week. Next week, we'll be catching up with Kieran, who will be leading us through a discussion about our current key project about 1,000 play streets that is rolling out across the country. So thank you very much, everybody, and we hope to see many of you next week.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Rick.
No worries. No, thank you for the opportunity. I hope it was okay.
Were you happy with that, Rick?
Are we still on or are we off?
Yes, we're on, but
oh, okay. Well, that's I don't know. I didn't have to watch it.